What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Diesel Creek. If this is your first time joining us, my name's Matt. Behind me, my beautiful 1962 Galion grader, dubbed Christine, on account of, I believe she's officially cursed. There's been a bunch of things during the course of this project that have made me think that this thing is just out to get me, but I'm still pressing on. And right now, we just finished cleaning it off because a tree fell and splattered mud all over it. And I called out the reinforcements. Got my body man Douglas up here. We are getting old Christine painted up nice. Yeah, right. Anyways, I'm gonna set you guys up on a time lapse and we're gonna get this thing painted up. Then we'll start putting this thing back together. All right, so here we are, actually a month later, actually a little more than a month later, after we painted Christine here, and I think it turned out excellent. I couldn't be happier with the paint job for what we're doing. It's not a showpiece. It is a socially distant restoration, as I started saying early on, but I think it's actually a little bit better than socially distant at this point, and I couldn't be happier. Big thanks to my buddies for coming out there and giving me a hand getting this thing painted. Kind of scrambled because it was like the last nice day to paint something outdoors, so that's why we just hurried up and jumped into it. I really didn't have time. I'm just now getting to where I have time to get back on this project and hopefully get it put back together soon and fix up my driveway and whatever else we can get into with it. I know a lot of you guys can't wait to get this thing back together as well. So I'm not sure how well this stuff really comes through on the camera, but she's looking pretty nice. It is a little bit dusty and dirty, actually, just from sitting in here for a month or so now. It is fall, so there's lots of leaves coming down and debris in the air and wind and breeze, and yeah, so that's not surprising to me. But where are we at with this project now? Well, it's pretty much reassembly time. Although I did find one thing I have to tear into and fix before we can reassemble this thing. So while prepping this thing for paint, I hung the starter and the wiring harness over here on the bell housing of the transmission. And that's fine and dandy. But I discovered something while I was here. When we finally got around to prepping this thing for paint, the grader had been sitting for quite some time, and that means that there was no lubrication coming up from the transmission and getting onto any of these shafts in the transmission or anything, which is fine, but it gives you a chance to really spin things and see how they feel. I think we're in gear right now. So there's a little bit of rumbling bearing noise in there, and I have done some research online about these graters, and that shaft and its bearings are known for having problems because with the engine sitting there idling, if you're not in motion, there's no gear lube being slung up onto that top shaft. So anytime you're sitting there idling, basically you're spinning that shaft with no lubrication, which is not the greatest design. So rather than wait till I have this thing all assembled to find out that the bearings are going to fail in about 2 hours, we'll go ahead and pull this shaft out of there. It looks like 6 bolts. We can pull the shaft out and hopefully just pull the assembly out and get some new bearings for it. Alright, so to get this throw out shaft out of the way, you have to drive out the shaft on either side out of this piece here in the middle, which is cast. And there's no good way to like hit it or anything, so what I came up with was that, which is a connecting nut and a bolt. And I'm just unthreading the bolt out of the nut basically, which is pushing the shaft. And this one just started to move, so we'll go ahead and keep turning this nut until it comes out. I'm just using that socket as a spacer. So we'll just go ahead and keep turning this thing until we get one side free, and then hopefully the other side comes out a bit easier. Hallelujah! Woo! Alright. Well, I'm attempting to remove the hydraulic pump off the front of the transmission right now so that I can get to the other side of that input shaft. I couldn't get it out, so this is my next move here. Hopefully I can drive it from this side somehow, knocking it out, and we can get at those bearings. The other reason I'm taking this off is when we go to reinstall the engine, it's hard enough to align the input shaft with the clutch plate usually. And on this machine we have double duty there because there's a through shaft that runs into the hydraulic pump in the center of the input shaft. So we would have to line up two sets of splines at the same time, which I'm sure is going to be next to impossible. So hopefully with the pump off of there, we'll just line up the clutch and then we'll line up the pump afterwards. All right, there we go. So hopefully you guys can see there's the spline that the hydraulic pump runs off of. And man, with that off of there, you can really feel the bad spots in the bearings on this shaft. So we're gonna try to just knock it out this way. Hopefully that does it. This seal here has obviously been leaking pretty bad too because there was a pool of transmission oil here, 90 weight. So yeah, we'll replace this seal and of course the bearings on the shaft. So there's a secondary section of housing here that I have to remove as well now. There we go. All right. Look at that. All that work we did on the backside of the transmission may have been for naught because it kind of looks like the whole thing's going to slide out this way. Oh, yeah. Man, am I glad I took this thing apart. Whoa, wait till you see this. Boy, check that out, huh? You guys see that? The bearing cage is broken open. There's one ball missing out of those ball bearings there, and that bearing will not spin. That could have been really bad. If that thing completely came apart and went through the transmission, this transmission might have been junk. So I'm really glad that I made the decision to not overlook that and pulled this apart. On this end of things, this is the input shaft for the hydraulic pump, and man, you should feel how gritty that bearing is. It looks to me like there is some water that had condensated up in that area and probably pitted up that bearing. So yeah, I can see water droplets all around it, and it's kind of rusty. So we'll replace that bearing, that seal, and of course the two bearings down there on the input shaft. I still have to figure out how to get that input shaft completely out. Oh, okay. There we go. That's one bearing. Yeah, you can see there's rust on the backside of that one too. Man. There's the input shaft. Now the gear and everything looks fine. I mean, the shaft itself looks fine. Just need to replace that bearing, the other one, some seals, and we'll be back in business. I'm really glad I opted to pull this out. Actually, just sitting here studying the bearing some more, it actually looks like there are two balls missing. So where they are is anybody's guess, but they should be down at the bottom of the transmission where they shouldn't cause any problems though. or they drained out and that oil clear back when this thing was frozen coming off the trailer, and I drained the transmission back then. A lot of water. Yep. I haven't even seen much oil yet. Alright, well, I wasn't planning on recording the tire removal process. However, I should have, because it turned into quite the adventure. But by the time I realized it was good content, I was way too irritated to be filming anything. I'm quite familiar with stubborn tire removal, and this was a whole new level. I've never seen anything like this. I cut the bead completely in half on both sides of the tire, ended up fishing a chain clear through one half of the tire, and then hooking to the rim there and trying to pull them apart, and I cannot get these tires off the rims. So yeah, I pretty much I tried everything in the book. There is nothing holding the rubber onto the rim aside from the corrosion, or it's like the rubber has welded itself right to the rim. It's the craziest thing. The bead is completely cut through in 4 places. Alright, I got one last trick. Try to get these tires off the rims without just burning them off of there. This is driving me nuts. This is the craziest tire experience I've ever had. Anyways, I'm gonna give this a go. If this doesn't work, I don't know. Alright, as you can very well see, there's a lot of weight on that tire bead right now, and it still isn't breaking. It's pushed it down, but it's not even thinking about breaking it loose. So that's the end of the road for these tires. They're coming off with excessive force, as if this wasn't already excessive force. Oh no, what are these burnt, mangled, twisted pieces of metal over here? Well, those, unfortunately, my friend, is stupidity materialized. In a fit of rage, trying to remove those tires, which, by the way, they're the most stubborn tires I've ever seen to try to remove, I went full last resort mode, and plan D is never a good one. So I ended up just burning the tires off, and I'm gonna get some flack for that alone. This rim didn't come out too bad, and I have one more rim that is fine. This rim, maybe you could straighten it. I think it's fine in a circular fashion, or at least close to fine in a circular fashion. But if you're able to look across it, like in a level plane, it is warped a bit. This one here is all kinds of out around and bent and warped and tweaked. That one's completely junk. No way you'll fix that one. So if anybody knows where there are some 6x20 style rims like this, I would be interested in buying a couple. I need at least one, maybe two. So yeah, that was stupid. I'm not going to try that anymore. All right, well, here we are, like a little over a week later, and I have all new bearings to replace these two. I got a new seal to replace this guy, although it is a bit smaller, thinner rather, but should still work all the same. And we got this guy to replace this guy, of course. So we can go ahead and start reassembling. So when you're fitting bearings onto a shaft like we are here, this shaft is actually what they call an interference fit. So to keep this bearing situated on there correctly, it needs to be very tight, which means that the shaft is usually a couple thousandths of an inch bigger in diameter than the inside of this bearing. So in order to get this thing seated on there correctly, there are special tools called bearing heaters, which will heat this thing up, and of course when metal heats up it expands, making this inside diameter larger. So the old trick that I always use, rather than having one of those fancy tools, now you don't need to heat the bearing up very much. You just need to get it to maybe 100, 150 degrees, something like that, and that expands it enough that it should slip over the shaft without too much trouble. Nice, quick, even heat. You don't want to heat one spot too long. You can ruin your bearing if you overheat it. So I just kind of watch the steel. All new bearings are covered in oil, and when that oil starts to turn just a little bit of tannish brown, that's usually when I know it's heated up enough, and it should drop right on. Looks like we should be there. Still need a little bit of help getting started. You only want to tap on the inner race. You don't ever want to drive on the outer race. Oh, of course, this sucker is not wanting to go on here. There we go, freshly installed and not damaged. We're going to do the exact same procedure with the bearing on our input shaft here. And fun little trick here, if you have the old bearings, what came off of this, you can use them to hold the new bearings so it's easier to heat them. And then once you try to stick it on there, if you need to use something to tap it down a little bit, the old bearing in this scenario, we don't have to go down over a long shaft or anything. The fit is the size of the bearing. But you can use the old bearing to drive the new bearing on, and it won't damage the new bearing. Here we go. Yep. She needs a little persuasion. Beautiful. Two bearings ready to go. Next one is going to go all the way down on this fit right here. You want to make sure you're not driving onto your nice new bearing you just installed here. So in our case, the shaft does protrude past the bearing ever so slightly, which is all we need to be able to make sure we're putting pressure onto the shaft and not the bearing. There we go. That is a perfect example of how that's supposed to work. Heat it up just enough to where it slips right on, And now it'll shrink back down as it cools and clamp itself into that fit, and we are ready to reassemble. What we're doing is we're actually driving that rear bearing into the transmission housing, and that's seating that bearing. That looks about right. All right, so we have this shaft ready to slide together, and we are going to leave it out for the time being though, because this is the input shaft for the PTO pump over there, and it is going to make installing the engine 10 times easier to have that thing removed until the engine is in and the input shaft is in through the clutch, and then we can slide this shaft through and align it into the spline, so we're not trying to do two splines at once. That'll make our lives much easier. Other than that, the transmission is back together, and this grader is finally ready for reassembly. And it's been a long road, but I'm pretty excited to see this thing come together now. It's come out a lot better than I ever imagined that we would with this thing. And I wouldn't call it a showpiece, but dang, she don't look too bad. Well, I guess it's probably about time to cut this video off here, guys. If you would, do me a favor, give me a big old thumbs up for Christine here. She's come out a lot better than I ever anticipated we would. We went further along with this restoration, if you will, than I ever thought we would. So I'm really happy with it. I think it looks great for what it is and the amount of time and money I've put into it. And I'm really looking forward to having a nice functioning grader that I can use around here, take to do jobs, and take to some shows as well. So I appreciate you guys watching. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, make sure you tickle that subscribe button so I can catch you on the next episode. Thanks for watching. Later.